She had no one left, but still she asked the stranger with the weathered eyes to be her dad. And he didn't laugh, didn't leave, didn't say no. What kind of man takes in a child he just met, and what kind of hurt was he hiding behind that silence? The locomotive hisses to a stop at the loneliest train station you've ever seen. Nothing but weathered planks, a rusty sign, an endless desert stretching in every direction. Most passengers barely glance out the window before the train moves on, but today something's different. Sitting on a battered leather suitcase that's seen better decades, 8-year-old Junebug Carson swings her legs and clutches two precious things. A faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a piece of paper she's written in careful block letters that reads, "Looking for a father." She's been waiting here for 3 days. When the train doors open, most folks step down, stretch their legs, and climb right back on. But one man stays. Ellis Creed moves like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, tall, weathered, with eyes that have seen too much and said too little. His clothes are travel-worn, his hat pulled low, and everything about him screams, "Leave me alone." Junebug watches him with the fearless curiosity only children possess. While other passengers give him a wide berth, she hops off her suitcase and walks right up to him. "Mister," she says, her voice clear as a bell in the desert air, "are you going somewhere important?" Ellis pauses, his hand on his bedroll. He looks down at this tiny girl with dirt-smudged cheeks and hope in her eyes, and something inside his chest tightens. He's spent years perfecting the art of not getting involved, of walking away from complications. "Depends on your definition of important," he says, his voice rougher than he intended. Junebug studies his face with the intensity of someone reading a map. Then she takes a deep breath and asks the question that will change both their lives forever. "Will you be my dad?" The words hang in the desert air like heat shimmer. Ellis freezes, his grip tightening on his belongings. This isn't the first time someone's asked him for something, but it's definitely the strangest request he's ever received from a child. "Kid, I don't even know your name," he says, taking a step back. "It's Junebug, Junebug Carson, and I know yours. It's written on your bag. Ellis Creed." She points to the faded name tag on his bedroll. "I've been practicing saying it all morning just in case." Ellis looks around the empty station, searching for this girl's real family, for someone who's supposed to be responsible for her. But there's nobody. Just him, her, and the vast emptiness of the frontier. "Where are your parents, Junebug?" She holds up the photograph. "Mama's in heaven, Papa." "Well, I never had one of those. That's why I'm asking." For a moment, Ellis almost walks away. Every instinct he's developed over years of drifting tells him to get back on that train and never look back. Children mean complications, attachments, and pain he's not ready to face again. But something in her voice stops him cold. Maybe it's the way she asked. Not begging, not demanding, just asking. Like she's offering him something instead of taking it. If this has touched you already, wait until you see what he does next. Don't forget to comment below if you'd ever make a promise to a stranger. The train whistle blows. Ellis has maybe 30 seconds to decide whether he's getting back on or staying in this God-forsaken place with a little girl who thinks she can just ask strangers to be her father. He looks at Junebug, who's watching him with patient hope, like she's got all the time in the world for him to figure out the right answer. Ellis doesn't get back on the train. He tells himself it's just temporary. He'll walk her to the next settlement, make sure she gets to wherever she's supposed to be, and then disappear like smoke on the wind. It's what he does best. "So where exactly are we walking to?" he asks as they start down the dusty trail that leads away from the station. Junebug adjusts the straps on her suitcase and grins. "Anywhere you want, Papa." "Don't call me that." "What should I call you then?" Ellis considers this. He's been called a lot of things over the years, most of them not suitable for young ears. "Ellis is fine." "Ellis, Papa?" "Just Ellis." She nods seriously, like he's given her important instructions, then immediately starts chattering about everything she sees along the trail. The way the clouds look like animals, how the rocks have faces if you squint just right, why she thinks lizards are probably just tiny dragons that lost their fire. Ellis grunts occasional responses, but mostly he listens. It's been a long time since he's heard anyone talk with such pure enthusiasm about the world around them. Most folks he encounters are either afraid of him or want something from him. Junebug seems to simply enjoy his company. When they stop to rest under a scraggly mesquite tree, she pulls out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside are two hard biscuits and a piece of jerky. "Want to share lunch?" she asks, breaking one biscuit in half. Ellis realizes he hasn't eaten since yesterday, but he shakes his head. "That's yours, kid. Mama always said food tastes better when you share it with someone you care about." She holds out half the biscuit with such earnest generosity that Ellis finds himself taking it. It's dry as dust and probably older than he wants to think about, but somehow it tastes better than the fancy meals he's eaten in his lifetime. As they eat, Junebug talks about her mother, how she sang while cooking, how she could make wildflowers into crowns, how she always tucked Junebug in with stories about brave princesses and gentle dragons. Her voice doesn't break when she talks about missing her, but Ellis can hear the careful way she chooses her words, like she's walking around the sharp edges of grief. "She got sick real sudden," Junebug explains, picking at the crust of her biscuit. "Doctor said there wasn't anything to be done. Before she, before she went to heaven, she told me I was strong enough to find my own family if I needed to." Ellis looks at this 8-year-old girl who's been completely alone for weeks, and he feels something crack open in his chest, something he's kept locked away for a very long time. "That's why you were at the station," he says. "Mama said the right person would know what to do with a girl like me. As soon as I saw you, I knew." "Knew what?" She looks at him with those serious brown eyes that seem far too old for her face. "That you needed someone to take care of, and I needed someone to take care of me." The words hit Ellis like a punch to the gut. He wants to tell her she's wrong, that he's the last person anyone should depend on, that caring for people is a luxury he can't afford. But before he can speak, he hears it, the distinctive rattle that makes every frontier dweller's blood run cold. Moving faster than thought, Ellis sweeps Junebug behind him and draws his revolver in one fluid motion. The rattlesnake is coiled 3 feet away, its warning clear and deadly. The shot echoes across the desert. When the smoke clears, the snake is dead, and Junebug is staring at Ellis with something approaching awe. "You saved me," she whispers. Ellis holsters his weapon, his hand steadier than his voice. "Just being careful." But as they continue walking, he finds himself scanning the trail ahead more carefully, positioning himself between Junebug and any potential danger. He tells himself it's just instinct, but deep down he knows the truth. He's already starting to care about this strange little girl who asked a stranger to be her father, and that terrifies him more than any rattlesnake ever could. By evening, they reach what used to be a mining camp, now just a collection of abandoned shacks slowly surrendering to the desert wind. Ellis chooses the sturdiest-looking cabin, kicks the door open, and steps aside to let Junebug peek inside. "It's perfect," she breathes, like she's looking at a palace instead of a one-room shack with gaps in the walls and a roof that's seen better decades. Ellis sees broken furniture, dust thick as carpet, and enough spider webs to stock a Halloween show. It's a wreck. "It just needs some love," Junebug says, dragging her suitcase inside. "Mama always said any place could be home if you put your heart into it." While Ellis builds a fire in the cracked stone fireplace, Junebug transforms the space with the kind of magic only children possess. She arranges her few belongings on a wooden crate, spreads her mother's quilt over a pile of old sacks to make a bed, and somehow finds enough wildflowers growing through the floorboards to create a bouquet for the windowsill. "See," she says, standing back to admire her work. "Home." Ellis wants to tell her this isn't home. It's just a temporary shelter, a place to rest before he figures out where to take her. But watching her face glow in the firelight, he can't bring himself to shatter her illusion. As night falls, Junebug curls up on her makeshift bed and pulls her mother's photograph from her pocket. She whispers something to it, a prayer maybe, or just a good night, then carefully tucks it away. "Ellis," she says softly, "will you tell me about your family?" The question hits Ellis like a physical blow. He stares into the fire, seeing flames that look too much like the ones that took everything he'd ever loved. "Don't have a family. You must have had someone, sometime." Ellis closes his eyes, and suddenly he's not in a desert cabin anymore. He's in a farmhouse in Missouri, holding his wife Sarah's hand as she tries to bring their daughter into the world. He's watching the light fade from her eyes as she whispers, "Take care of our baby girl." He's standing beside two graves on a hill, understanding that love is just another word for loss. "Had a wife once," he says finally, "and a daughter, for about 10 minutes. Junebug's voice is gentle when she speaks. What happened to them?" "Childbirth took them both. Sarah, my wife, she fought hard to give our little girl life, but sometimes fighting isn't enough." The cabin falls silent except for the crackling fire and the desert wind whistling through the gaps in the walls. Ellis expects Junebug to ask more questions, to push for details he can't bear to share. Instead, she gets up from her bed and walks over to where he's sitting. Without a word, she takes one of his bootlaces and starts braiding it with a piece of ribbon from her hair. Her small fingers work carefully in the firelight, creating something beautiful from two very different things. "My mama used to braid my hair every morning," she says quietly. "Said it was how she made sure a piece of her was with me all day. Maybe, maybe when someone dies, the love doesn't die with them. Maybe it just finds new ways to show up." She ties the finished braid around his wrist, bootlace and ribbon woven together into something stronger than either could be alone. Ellis stares at the makeshift bracelet, and for the first time in years, he feels something other than numbness where his heart used to be. It's terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected. "Thank you," he whispers. Junebug smiles and returns to her bed. Within minutes, she's asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. But Ellis sits awake long into the night, touching the braid on his wrist and wondering if maybe, just maybe, he's been running from the wrong things all these years. Outside, the desert wind carries the scent of rain and new possibilities. And for the first time since Sarah died, Ellis allows himself to hope that tomorrow might be different than yesterday. Morning brings the smell of coffee and the sound of Junebug humming while she attempts to cook something resembling breakfast over the fire. Ellis wakes to find her carefully dividing a can of beans between two tin plates she somehow procured from the cabin's dusty corners. "Sleep well?" she asks, as cheerful as if they're staying in the finest hotel instead of a half-collapsed mining shack. Ellis sits up, his back protesting after a night on the hard ground. "Where'd you get the coffee?" "Found it in my suitcase. Mama always said good coffee makes everything better." She hands him a cup of what might generously be called coffee if you squint and use your imagination. It tastes like boiled dirt, but Ellis drinks it anyway and tells her it's perfect. After breakfast, they pack up and continue down the trail. By midday, they crest a small hill and see Ash Hollow spread out below them. A proper town with a main street, wooden sidewalks, and the kind of civilization Ellis has been avoiding for years. "Look," Junebug says, pointing excitedly. "A real town, with a church and everything. Can we go see it?" Ellis hesitates. Towns mean people, and people mean questions he's not ready to answer. But Junebug needs supplies, maybe someone who can take better care of her than a drifting gunfighter with too much blood on his hands. "Just for supplies," he says. The moment they walk down Main Street, Ellis knows this was a mistake. Conversations stop mid-sentence as people notice him. Men touch their hat brims but keep their distance. Women pull their children a little closer. It's the same reaction he gets everywhere, the unmistakable recognition that he's dangerous. But Junebug doesn't notice any of it. She walks beside him with her head high, chattering about the horses tied to hitching posts and the pretty dresses in the seamstress shop window. At the general store, the clerk's hand hovers near a shotgun under the counter. "Help you folks?" "Just need some basic supplies," Ellis says, keeping his voice level. "Food for the trail." While Ellis selects jerky and hardtack, Junebug wanders over to where a small group of children are peering through the window at penny candy. The store owner's wife notices her worn dress and the careful way she counts 3 pennies in her palm. "You new in town, sweetheart?" the woman asks kindly. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Junebug Carson, and this is my papa, Ellis Creed." She points proudly in Ellis's direction. Ellis freezes. Every adult in the store turns to stare at him with new interest. He wants to correct her, to explain that he's not her father, just someone who happened to be at the right place when she needed help. But something in Junebug's voice stops him. The way she says, my papa, like it's the most natural thing in the world. Your papa, huh? The store owner relaxes slightly. Well, any man raising a polite little girl can't be all bad. Outside the store, the town blacksmith approaches them. He's a mountain of a man with kind eyes and forearms like tree trunks. Name's Jake Morrison, he says, extending a hand to Ellis. Heard you folks might be passing through. Could use some help at the forge if you're looking for work. Nothing permanent, mind you. Just a few days of honest labor. Ellis looks at Junebug, who's making friends with Morrison's dog and looking happier than he's seen her since they met. Maybe, he says. There's a room above my shop, Morrison continues. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and dry. Better than camping rough with a little one. That evening, as Junebug feeds scraps to Morrison's dog and laughs at its antics, the blacksmith pulls Ellis aside. That's a special little girl you got there, Morrison says. Takes a good man to raise a child on his own. Her mother passed, I'm guessing? Ellis nods, not trusting himself to speak. Well, she's lucky to have you. Not every man would take on that responsibility. As they settle into the room above the blacksmith shop that night, Junebug curls up on a real bed for the first time in weeks. Ellis, she says sleepily, I like it here. Do you think we could stay, just for a little while? Ellis looks out the window at the peaceful town below, then at this little girl who somehow convinced everyone that he's the kind of man who deserves to be called Papa. Just one more day, he says, though something in his chest whispers that one day might not be enough. Ellis wakes before dawn to the sound of boots on wooden stairs. His hand moves instinctively to his gun before his mind fully processes what he's hearing. Someone's coming up to their room, moving with the careful, measured pace of a man who knows how to handle trouble. Junebug sleeps peacefully beside him, her small hand curled around the edge of her mother's quilt. Ellis slips from the bed without making a sound and positions himself between the door and the girl who started calling him Papa. The knock, when it comes, is firm but not aggressive. Ellis Creed, a familiar voice calls through the door. Been a long time. Ellis's blood turns to ice water. He knows that voice, would recognize it anywhere, even after all these years. Sheriff Tom Bridger, once Captain Tom Bridger of the Union Army, the man who gave Ellis his orders during the war and watched him carry them out with the kind of efficiency that earned medals and nightmares in equal measure. Tom, Ellis says, opening the door but keeping his body blocking the entrance. Didn't expect to see you here. Sheriff Bridger looks older, grayer, but his eyes still hold the same sharp intelligence that made him a good commanding officer. Behind him stands a deputy Ellis doesn't recognize, a young man with nervous energy and a hand resting too casually on his gun. Heard there was a stranger in town, Bridger says. Imagine my surprise when Jake Morrison described a tall drink of water with pale eyes and steady hands, traveling with a little girl. Thought to myself, that sounds like Ellis Creed. But Ellis Creed wouldn't be playing house with a child, would he? She's not playing, Ellis says quietly. She needed help. Bridger's gaze moves to where Junebug is starting to stir, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What are you calling it these days? Help? The accusation in his voice makes Ellis's jaw clench. Careful, Tom. Or what? You'll do to me what you did to Lieutenant Morrison back in Shiloh? What did you do to those Confederate prisoners who surrendered? Junebug sits up in bed, instantly alert despite her youth. Children who've survived on their own develop keen instincts for danger, and she can feel the tension crackling between the two men, like electricity before a thunderstorm. Ellis, she says softly, who is this man? Go back to sleep, Junebug, Ellis says without taking his eyes off Bridger. Everything's fine, but everything is not fine, and they all know it. Bridger steps closer, lowering his voice so only Ellis can hear. You don't get to outrun blood and fire forever, soldier. What you did during the war, the things you were capable of, a man like that doesn't just start caring for children. It doesn't work that way. People change, Ellis says. Do they? Or do they just find new ways to hide who they really are? The conversation is interrupted by Junebug climbing out of bed and walking over to them with the fearless curiosity that Ellis is beginning to recognize as her trademark. She looks up at Sheriff Bridger with serious brown eyes. Are you here to arrest my papa? She asks. Bridger's expression softens slightly. No, sweetheart. Just having a conversation with an old friend. Good, Junebug says firmly, because he's a good papa, and good papas shouldn't get arrested. She slips her small hand into Ellis's, and he feels that familiar tightening in his chest. This little girl believes in him with absolute certainty and has somehow convinced herself that he's worth calling papa. And here's Tom Bridger, dredging up every horrible thing Ellis did during the war, threatening to destroy the fragile peace he's found. We'll be moving on today, Ellis says finally. See that you do, Bridger replies. And Ellis, if anything happens to that little girl, if she turns up missing or hurt, I'll find you. War's over, but some debts never get paid in full. After Bridger leaves, Ellis sits heavily on the edge of the bed. Junebug climbs up beside him and leans against his shoulder. He seemed angry, she observes. Old friends sometimes carry old grudges, Ellis says. Are you really going to make us leave? Ellis looks down at her upturned face, so trusting and hopeful, and feels something break inside his chest. He spent years running from his past, from the things he did in the name of duty and country. But maybe running isn't the answer anymore. Pack your things, he says gently. We need to go. But even as he says the words, Ellis knows that leaving Ash Hollow won't solve anything. Some problems follow you no matter how far you run, and some little girls burrow so deep into your heart that walking away becomes impossible. By the time they finish packing, Junebug has disappeared. Ellis finds her just as the sun crests the hills east of town, sitting cross-legged beside a small headstone in the cemetery that overlooks Ash Hollow. She's arranged wildflowers around the grave and is speaking softly to the weathered marble, her voice carrying the one-sided conversation of someone who needs to be heard. I found him, Mama, she's saying, just like you said I would. He's got sad eyes like yours did sometimes, but he takes care of me real good. Make sure I eat and stay safe and everything. Ellis approaches slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The headstone reads, Margaret Carson, beloved mother, 1845 to 1891. And suddenly everything about Junebug makes more sense. This is where she came from, where her journey began before she ended up at that lonely train station. Figured you'd run off to see her, Ellis says gently, settling beside Junebug on the hard ground. Wanted to tell her about you before we left, Junebug explains. She always said when something important happened, I should share it with her, even if she couldn't answer back. They sit in comfortable silence as the town below them begins to wake up. Smoke rises from chimneys, dogs bark in distant yards, and somewhere a church bell is ringing in the morning hours. It's peaceful here, surrounded by the quiet presence of people who've finished their earthly worries. Tell me about her, Ellis says. Junebug's face lights up with the special glow children get when talking about someone they love completely. She was the prettiest lady in the whole territory, had hair like spun gold, and a laugh that made everybody smile. She could cook anything and make it taste like heaven, and she sang while she worked. Always singing. Sounds like a special woman. She was, and she was brave too. When my real papa died in the mine collapse, she didn't cry where I could see, just kept going, kept taking care of me, kept making sure I knew I was loved. Ellis understands now why Junebug approached him with such confidence at the train station. She was raised by a woman who taught her that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice, commitment, and love. She got sick real sudden, Junebug continues, her voice growing quieter. Doctors said it was her heart, and that sometimes hearts just wear out from working too hard. Before she went to sleep that last time, she made me promise to be brave and find people who would love me back. Is that what you did? At the station? Junebug turns to look at him with those serious brown eyes. I asked God to send me a papa who needed a little girl as much as I needed a papa. And then you got off that train. The simple faith in her words makes Ellis's throat tight. This child believes in divine providence, in the idea that broken people can be led to each other for healing. It's a beautiful thought, even if Ellis isn't sure he deserves such grace. Your mama was right about you being brave, he says. She was right about you too. What do you mean? Junebug pulls her mother's photograph from her pocket and shows it to Ellis. On the back, written in fading ink, are the words, Trust your heart, little bird. It will lead you to the family you're meant to have. Ellis studies the photograph, a woman with Junebug's eyes and smile, holding a baby who would grow up to ask strangers to be her father. There's something in Margaret Carson's expression that speaks of wisdom and hope, as if she knew her daughter would need guidance long after she was gone. I think she would have liked you, Junebug says softly. You think so? I know so. She always said the best people are the ones who've been hurt but still choose to be kind. As they sit together in the morning stillness, Ellis feels something shifting inside his chest. For years, he's carried the weight of his failures, the inability to save Sarah and their daughter, the terrible things he did during the war, the belief that he's too broken to deserve love or family. But sitting here with Junebug, watching her talk to her mother's grave with such pure faith, Ellis begins to wonder if maybe redemption isn't about earning forgiveness. Maybe it's about accepting it when it's freely offered by an 8-year-old girl who sees something worth saving in a damaged drifter. Junebug, he says carefully, what if I told you I'm not the kind of man who deserves to be anyone's papa? She considers this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. Then I'd tell you that's exactly why you should be mine. Mama always said the people who worry about being good enough usually are. Ellis closes his eyes and feels something break open inside him. Not the sharp crack of heartbreak, but the gentler breaking of ice on a frozen river when spring finally comes. Come on, he says, standing and offering Junebug his hand. Let's go home. Where's home, she asks. Ellis looks down at this extraordinary little girl who chose him out of all the people in the world to be her father, and he knows the answer with sudden, startling clarity. Wherever you are. They've been back in town for exactly 3 hours when the stranger arrives. Ellis is working the forge with Jake Morrison, learning the rhythm of hammer on steel, while Junebug helps Mrs. Morrison in the kitchen garden behind their house. It's peaceful work, the kind that makes a man think he might be able to build something good with his hands instead of destroying things. Then the black carriage rolls up Main Street like a funeral procession. The man who steps out is everything Ellis isn't, well-dressed, clean-shaven, with the soft hands of someone who's never worked a day of manual labor in his life. He carries himself with the casual arrogance of wealth, surveying Ash Hollow like he's considering whether to buy it or burn it down. I'm looking for a child, he announces to anyone within earshot. A girl named June Carson. I believe she may be in the company of a drifter. Word travels fast in a small town. Within minutes, half of Ash Hollow knows there's a fancy gentleman asking questions about Junebug, and the other half is hurrying to find out what they missed. Ellis sets down his hammer and wipes the sweat from his forehead, already knowing this can't be good news. The stranger introduces himself as Cornelius Whitmore, attorney and executor of estates, representing the family of the late Margaret Carson. He produces official-looking papers and speaks in the kind of legal language designed to intimidate people who can't afford lawyers of their own. The child is the daughter of my late nephew, David Carson, Whitmore explains to Sheriff Bridger, who's been called to oversee the situation. David died in a mining accident 2 years ago, leaving his wife and child in reduced circumstances. Now that Margaret has also passed, it falls to me to ensure the child receives proper care. Ellis arrives just in time to hear Whitmore's closing argument. I've come to take young June back east, where she can be raised by family members with the resources to provide her with education, refinement, and all the advantages her current guardian clearly cannot offer. She's not going anywhere, Ellis says quietly. Whitmore turns to study Ellis with the calculating gaze of a man evaluating livestock. And you are? Ellis Creed. Junebug's guardian. Guardian? Whitmore's laugh is sharp and dismissive. I'm afraid you have no legal standing here, Mr. Creed. The child belongs with family, not with some vagrant who happened upon her during her time of vulnerability. Sheriff Bridger steps forward, his expression carefully neutral. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Whitmore? I'm proposing nothing. I'm informing you that I have legal custody of my grandniece, and I'll be taking her back to Boston, where she belongs. She'll want for nothing. The finest schools, proper clothing, a house with indoor plumbing and gas lighting. Surely even you can see that's preferable to this. He gestures dismissively at the frontier town around them, as if the entire place is beneath his notice. That's when Junebug appears, drawn by the commotion like a moth to flame. She takes one look at Cornelius Whitmore, his expensive clothes, his cold eyes, his air of entitled authority, and moves instinctively closer to Ellis. "Uncle Cornelius," she says uncertainty. "Mama said you never wanted anything to do with us." "Circumstances change, my dear," Whitmore says, his voice taking on the artificially sweet tone adults use when trying to manipulate children. "I've come to take you home, to give you all the things your poor mother couldn't provide." "I already have a home," Junebug says firmly, "with my papa." Whitmore's gaze sharpens as he looks between Ellis and Junebug. "This man is not your father, child. Your father was my nephew David, a good man who died tragically young. This person has no claim to you whatsoever." "He has every claim," Junebug says, her voice rising with the kind of passionate conviction only children can muster. "He chose me, and I chose him. That makes us family." But Whitmore has the law on his side, and they all know it. He produces more papers, birth certificates, death certificates, genealogical records proving his connection to Junebug's father. Ellis has nothing but a bootlace bracelet in the trust of a little girl who asked a stranger to be her dad. "Pack your things, June," Whitmore says. "We leave in the morning." That night, as Ellis sits on the edge of Junebug's bed in the room above the blacksmith shop, she clings to him with desperate intensity. "Don't let them take me," she whispers. "Please, Papa. I don't want to go with him. He doesn't love me. He just wants to own me." Ellis holds her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and wondering how something so precious fell into his unworthy hands. "I don't know how to stop him, Junebug. The law says he has the right. But what about what I want? Doesn't that matter?" Ellis wishes he could tell her yes, that what she wants matters more than anything else in the world. But he's learned the hard way that the law rarely cares about what children want, especially when there's money and family reputation involved. "I won't forget you," he promises. "No matter what happens, I won't forget." But even as he says the words, Ellis is already planning. Cornelius Whitmore may have the law on his side, but Ellis has something more powerful: the desperate love of a man who's finally found something worth fighting for. 3 days into their peaceful routine at Ash Hollow, Ellis wakes before dawn to the sound of boots on wooden stairs. His hand moves instinctively to his gun before his mind fully processes what he's hearing. Someone's coming up to their room, moving with the careful, measured pace of a man who knows how to handle trouble. That night, Ellis sits on the edge of Junebug's bed, watching her sleep and wrestling with the hardest decision of his life. He knows Whitmore will be back in the morning with legal papers and probably armed men. He knows he has no legal claim to this child who's become his whole world. "Dear Junebug," he writes by candlelight, then stops, staring at the inadequate words. How do you explain to an 8-year-old girl that sometimes loving someone means fighting for them, even when the odds are impossible? By the time he finishes the letter, a promise rather than a goodbye, dawn is breaking over Ash Hollow. He folds it carefully and places it in his shirt pocket, then checks his weapons with the grim efficiency of a man preparing for war. He's not running this time. Some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. The plan is simple. Meet Whitmore head-on, legal papers or no legal papers. But when Ellis steps outside, he hears the scream that changes everything. It cuts through the early morning stillness like a knife, high and terrified and unmistakably Junebug's voice. Ellis drops his bedroll and runs toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs with a fear more primal than anything he felt during the war. He finds them in the alley behind the hotel, Whitmore trying to force a struggling Junebug into his carriage, while his hired thugs hold off anyone who might interfere. The little girl is fighting like a wildcat, kicking and biting and screaming for her papa, with a desperation that makes Ellis's vision go red around the edges. "Let her go," Ellis says, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that makes smart men step back and stupid men reach for their guns. Whitmore spins around, still gripping Junebug's arm. "Mr. Creed, how convenient. I was hoping to avoid this unpleasantness. But since you've chosen to interfere—" "I said let her go." One of Whitmore's men, a thick-set brute with scars on his knuckles, steps forward with his hand on his gun. "Boss says the kid comes with us. You got a problem with that?" Ellis looks at Junebug, sees the tears streaming down her face, the absolute terror in her eyes as these strangers try to drag her away from everything she knows. And something inside him breaks. Not the gentle breaking of ice in spring, but the violent shattering of a dam that's held back years of rage and grief and protective fury. Yeah, Ellis says quietly. I have a problem with that. The gunfight is over before most people realize it started. Ellis draws and fires twice in the span of a heartbeat. The hired thug drops his unfired weapon and staggers backward, clutching his shoulder. His partner decides that discretion is the better part of valor and disappears around the corner like smoke. Whitmore releases Junebug and reaches inside his coat, but Ellis's gun is already trained on his chest. Don't, Ellis says. Please don't make me kill you in front of her. You're making a terrible mistake, Whitmore snarls. I have legal custody. The territorial authorities will hunt you down like a dog. Maybe, but they'll have to catch me first. Sheriff Bridger arrives just as Ellis is helping Junebug into his saddle. The sheriff's hand rests on his gun, but he doesn't draw. Behind him, half the town has gathered to witness the showdown. Ellis, Bridger says carefully, think about what you're doing. I am thinking. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. You can't just take her. This man has legal papers. Legal papers don't mean love, Ellis says, swinging up behind Junebug. They don't mean protection or kindness or any of the things a child actually needs. All they mean is that some judge in some courthouse decided what was convenient for the adults involved. Junebug leans back against his chest, her small body trembling with relief and residual fear. I knew you wouldn't leave me, she whispers. Never, Ellis says firmly. Never again. Whitmore is screaming threats about federal marshals and kidnapping charges. But Ellis doesn't listen. He's looking at Sheriff Bridger, seeing something unexpected in the older man's eyes. Not anger or duty, but understanding. Tom, Ellis says quietly, she asked me to be her father, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. When's the last time anyone wanted you for who you are instead of what you can do for them? Bridger is quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Ellis and the little girl who's chosen a dangerous drifter over a wealthy relative. Finally, he steps aside. My horse threw a shoe, he says to no one in particular. Gonna take me at least an hour to get it fixed before I can pursue any fugitives. Ellis nods his thanks and touches his heels to his horse's sides. As they ride out of Ash Hollow, Junebug turns in the saddle to wave goodbye to the people who've become their friends. Where are we going, she asks. Ellis looks ahead at the open road, the endless horizon, the 1,000 possibilities that await a man and his daughter. Anywhere you want to go. As long as we're together, as long as we're together. Behind them, Ash Hollow grows smaller and smaller until it disappears entirely. But ahead of them stretches the rest of their lives, and for the first time since Sarah died, Ellis believes that might be enough. The chase lasts 3 days of hard riding through territory Ellis knows better than his pursuers. They follow old game trails through mountain passes, sleep under stars instead of roofs, and live on jerky and stream water while staying ahead of whatever law enforcement Whitmore has managed to mobilize. Finally, they reach a valley Ellis remembers from his army days. Good water, defensible terrain, and far enough from main roads that unwanted visitors would have to work to find them. They make camp beside a stream that runs clear and cold from the mountains, and for the first time since leaving Ash Hollow, Ellis allows himself to believe they might actually be safe. Junebug has been unusually quiet during their escape, processing the violence she witnessed and the reality of their situation. But as they sit by their campfire that evening, she finally speaks about what's been weighing on her mind. Ellis considers the question seriously. Probably. Taking you away from Whitmore, legally, that makes me a kidnapper. But you're my papa. Papas are supposed to protect their children. Not everybody sees it that way. Junebug absorbs this information with the stoic acceptance of a child who's learned early that the world isn't always fair. So what do? We keep moving, stay ahead of whoever might be looking for us, make a new life somewhere nobody knows our names. It sounds romantic when he says it. The open road, endless possibilities, freedom from the constraints of civilization. But Ellis knows the reality is harder. Constant vigilance, never staying anywhere long enough to build real connections, always looking over their shoulders for the law, or bounty hunters, or Whitmore's hired guns. I don't mind, Junebug says firmly. As long as we're together, I don't mind where we go. That's when Ellis hears the riders approaching, at least 4 horses, moving at a steady pace that suggests purpose rather than panic. He draws his gun and motions for Junebug to get behind the rocks near the stream. Ellis Creed, a familiar voice calls from the darkness. Mind if we ride in? We come in peace. Ellis recognizes Sheriff Bridger's voice, but he keeps his weapon ready. Depends on why you're here, Tom. To make you an offer you might want to hear. Bridger rides into the firelight accompanied by 3 men Ellis doesn't recognize, but their easy posture and the way they keep their hands visible suggests they're not here for a fight. One of them is wearing a badge that catches the flames. Ellis, I'd like you to meet Judge Samuel Morrison, Jake the blacksmith's brother, as it happens, and these gentlemen are from the territorial legislature. Judge Morrison is a lean man with intelligent eyes and the kind of presence that commands respect without demanding it. Mr. Creed, he says, dismounting carefully, I've heard quite a story about you and young Miss Carson here. Junebug, Ellis corrects. Her name is Junebug. The judge smiles. Of course, Junebug. I've heard how you've cared for her, protected her, and how she's chosen you as her guardian despite having other options. I've also heard about Cornelius Whitmore's methods of claiming custody. Ellis keeps his gun ready but doesn't point it at anyone. What's your point, Judge? My point is that sometimes the law and justice don't align as neatly as we'd like. Whitmore may have legal papers, but he acquired them through influence and intimidation, not genuine concern for the child's welfare. One of the legislative representatives steps forward. We've been investigating Whitmore's business practices. Turns out he owes significant debts back east, and Junebug stands to inherit a considerable trust fund from her father's mining shares. Taking custody of her wasn't about family obligation. It was about accessing her inheritance. Ellis feels something loosen in his chest. You're saying he was after her money? We're saying he never cared about her well-being at all, Judge Morrison confirms, which gives us grounds to invalidate his custody claim and find a more suitable guardian for the child. Junebug steps out from behind the rocks, her hand slipping into Ellis's. What kind of guardian? Judge Morrison kneels to her level, speaking with the gentle respect adults should always show children but rarely do. The kind you want, Junebug. Someone who's proven they'll put your needs first, who'll protect you and care for you, and never sell your happiness for their own gain. You mean Ellis can really be my papa? Legal and everything? If that's what you both want, yes. The territorial government is prepared to grant Mr. Creed full custody and adoption rights, with all the legal protections that entails. Ellis looks down at Junebug, this extraordinary little girl who asked a stranger to be her father and somehow convinced an entire territory that it was a good idea. What do you think? Want to make this official? Her answer is to throw her arms around his waist and hold on like she'll never let go. Yes, Papa. Yes, yes, yes. Sheriff Bridger clears his throat. There's one more thing. Jake Morrison asked me to tell you that your job at the forge is still open. Ash Hollow could use a good blacksmith, and we could all use the reminder that families come in all kinds of forms. You're offering us a home, Ellis asks. We're offering you a chance to build one, Judge Morrison corrects, with people who understand that love matters more than blood, and that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose for ourselves. As Ellis signs the adoption papers by firelight, making Junebug officially and legally his daughter, he thinks about the strange journey that brought them to this moment. A broken drifter and a brave little girl, both running from loss, both finding exactly what they needed in the most unlikely place. Welcome to the family, Junebug Creed, he says, and the name sounds absolutely perfect. She grins up at him with joy that could light the entire territory. Welcome to the family, Papa. 5 years later, Ellis Creed stands at the edge of the corral watching his daughter prepare for the most important race of her young life. Junebug, now 13 and tall for her age, adjusts her stirrups with the practiced efficiency of someone who's spent more time on horseback than on foot. Her hair is braided with ribbons that match the colors of Ash Hollow, and her face glows with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and where you belong. Are you nervous? Ellis asks, though he already knows the answer. Junebug doesn't get nervous. She gets focused. Not nervous, she says, swinging into the saddle with fluid grace. Just ready. The annual territorial horse race has drawn riders and spectators from 6 counties, all gathered in Ash Hollow, to watch the best young riders compete for the championship. Junebug is the youngest competitor by 2 years and the only girl, facts that have drawn both skepticism and support from the crowd. Ellis has watched her train for this race for months, seen her push herself and her horse to their limits, witnessed the quiet determination that's become her trademark. She rides like she does everything else, with her whole heart, holding nothing back. Remember what we practiced, Ellis says as she guides her horse toward the starting line. Trust the horse, trust myself, and run like the wind, she recites with a grin that reminds him so much of Margaret Carson, it sometimes takes his breath away. As the riders line up, Ellis finds himself thinking about the journey that brought them here. After the adoption was finalized, they'd return to Ash Hollow to discover a community that welcomed them with open arms. Ellis had taken over the blacksmith shop when Jake Morrison decided to retire, and Junebug had blossomed into the kind of young woman who could charm ornery horses and stubborn adults with equal ease. She'd kept her promise to visit her mother's grave regularly, often bringing Ellis along to introduce him properly to Margaret. Those conversations by the headstone had become some of Ellis's most treasured memories. Listening to Junebug share her dreams and fears with the mother who taught her to trust her heart. The starting gun fires, and 13 horses explode from the line in a thunder of hooves and dust. Ellis tracks Junebug's progress as she settles into third place, her horse running smooth and easy, while the front runners battle for position. She's learned patience along with skill, understanding that races are won in the final stretch, not the first 100 yards. Halfway through the course, she makes her move. Ellis watches with pride and terror as she guides her mount around the outside of the pack, gaining ground with each stride. The crowd is on its feet now, cheering for the local girl who's shown the older, more experienced riders what determination looks like. Coming into the final turn, Junebug is neck and neck with a boy from 3 counties over. Their horses match stride for stride. Ellis finds himself holding his breath, his heart hammering with the same intensity he once felt during cavalry charges. Then Junebug does something that makes Ellis laugh out loud despite his nerves. She leans forward and whispers something to her horse, some secret encouragement that only they understand. The animal responds with a burst of speed that carries them across the finish line a full length ahead of the competition. The crowd erupts in celebration as Junebug raises her hand in victory, her face radiant with joy and accomplishment. Ellis pushes through the crowd to reach her, arriving just as she dismounts and throws herself into his arms. "Did you see that, Papa? Did you see us fly?" "I saw," Ellis says, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw my daughter win the territorial championship. I saw courage and skill and heart. I saw everything your mother said you'd become." Later, as the celebration winds down and the sun sets over Ash Hollow, Junebug stands at the podium to accept her trophy. The crowd quiets as she prepares to speak, and Ellis finds himself holding his breath again. "This race means a lot to me," Junebug says, her young voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "Not just because I won, but because of who taught me that winning isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about never giving up, even when the odds are against you." She looks directly at Ellis, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. "I want to dedicate this victory to my papa, Ellis Creed. He's not the loudest man or the fanciest dresser, and he doesn't say much unless he has something important to say. But 5 years ago, when I asked a complete stranger to be my father, he didn't just say yes. He said yes with his whole heart." Ellis feels tears threatening, the kind of tears that come from joy too big to contain. Around him, the crowd is smiling and nodding, understanding that they're witnessing something special. "People sometimes ask me what it's like to have a papa who chose me instead of being stuck with me," Junebug continues. "And I tell them it's like knowing that every single day, someone looks at you and decides you're worth loving. That's what real family is. Not the people you're born to, but the people who choose to stay." As Junebug raises her trophy high, Ellis understands that this moment, watching his daughter celebrate not just her victory, but their bond, is worth every mile he traveled, every mistake he made, Every year he spent running from the very thing he needed most. He'd been a drifter, a broken man haunted by loss and guilt. But Junebug Carson had seen something in him worth saving, and in saving him, she'd saved herself too. They'd built a family from choice and courage, and the simple faith that love could heal the deepest wounds. Standing there in the fading light, surrounded by the community that had welcomed them both, Ellis Creed finally understands what home really means. It's not a place you come from. It's the people you choose to love and who choose to love you back. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it starts with a little girl asking a stranger to be her dad, and the stranger finding the courage to say yes. If you thought this was moving, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.